Bahrain National Stadium.
People started arriving at the stadium shortly after midnight, eager for the historic Mass, and afterwards cheered enthusiastically when the Pope greeted them from the Pope Mobile.
It captured world media attention with various international journalists among many media who covered the Papal Mass and broadcast the event live around the world. We can watch this report from Bara Abdullah.
So I'm here at the Bahrain National Stadium as we're here with His Holiness Pope Francis leading the prayers right here in this historical time for the Kingdom of Bahrain, as we're here in coexistence and in peace. As you can see, tens of thousands of people are all here to do the prayers right here at the Bahrain National Stadium at the Kingdom of Bahrain.
I am a resident of Bahrain since 1977, almost 45 years now. I feel that I am home. That's why I'm staying here, and I've decided to retire in the kingdom here. I feel really I'm within my family. I love this country. I love the people who are very friendly and very sincere indeed, and very modest and loving. This is a historical event today, really, that the Pope comes to Bahrain to conduct a Mass invited by His Majesty the King, who is really beloved by all of us. I don't have doubt that this is an indelible historical event. We are all thankful to the King and to the government and to the people of Bahrain for their love and for sharing with us this unbelievable event, which will always be in our hearts.
Of course, we're delighted to be here on this beautiful occasion. We're sharing the happiness with our Christian, Catholic brothers and sisters that are delighted when you see the expressions on their faces. They're all delighted to be here. If anything, this proves that the culture of understanding, of tolerance, of love and acceptance is part of Bahrain, part of its people, and of course part of its leadership.
It's a beautiful moment, to be honest. It's very humbling, and I really consider myself lucky to be here and be part of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I had an amazing experience here. I came for the Mass with my family, and for me this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we are blessed to have such an opportunity here in the small, tiny little island of Bahrain.
Feels like home. I mean, obviously, thank His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, Sheikh Salman, the royal family, for making this possible. It's great to have, a religious figure like Pope Francis over here. And bless the people of Bahrain and bless all your hearts.
This visit from the Pope, with the cooperation of His Royalty the King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, was, to be honest, a very pleasant moment and a very kind moment from His Majesty. And from a part of the Christian community in Bahrain, I felt like this was the happiest moment of my stay here after 5 years. I felt like I was closer to the people in here, and I also felt like Bahrain was more and more of a home to me.
So I really enjoyed today. It was really well organized, and it was really interesting to see how the Pope prayed and everything. And I really liked Bahrain, and I liked the Pope for visiting. So thank you for that.
Today is a dream come true. It is impossible made possible, and many thanks to our King, King Hamad bin Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa, and all his ministers and the people of the Kingdom of Bahrain for bringing our Pope, taking care of him, giving him so much respect, and which joyful tears are coming from my eyes from today's service, yesterday's service, and one more to attend. So we're very thankful to this country, beautiful country, Bahrain, where I am living more than 60 years happily, ever after.
I come from a congregation, a religious congregation called the White Fathers, and I have come especially from Dublin for this historic event where Pope Francis came and met with the Bahraini people and met with religious leaders from all over the world to speak of peace and friendship and harmony and tolerance. And it is a great honor and privilege to be once more in Bahrain after, I think the last time I visited this beautiful country was approximately 25 years ago. But I am so happy to be here today and to listen to the message of Pope Francis, where he is reaching out to all generations and all religious identities, speaking of peace and friendship and love.
Dear viewers, today has definitely been a historical day, as His Holiness Pope Francis today led the prayers right here at the Bahrain National Stadium with tens of thousands of people all together praying for peace, coexistence right here at the Oasis of Peace, the Kingdom of Bahrain, upon invitation by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. All that took place right here at the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Oasis of Peace. Bara Abdallah, Bahrain International TV.
Welcome back in the studio, and finally me and Gavin have a chance to talk about what's been happening the past 4 days. And I would like to get your take as a first timer in Bahrain and seeing the hosting of His Holiness the Pope by His Majesty the King and by the country. I mean, you commented a couple of times on the parade that was made and everything. Just give me your opinion on this whole event.
Yeah, you asked me to comment on what's been happening. What's not been happening. It's been quite amazing. I mean, just let's look at the theatre first, then get into some of the real meat of what's been discussed here. To see the Pope Mobile driving up towards the Royal Palace with that magnificent guard of horses and so on, and when they dropped the sound and you could hear the clapping, the hoofs on the road, it was quite moving, wasn't it? And you saw this Pope in his 86th year choosing Bahrain for this visit because he is going to meet again with the King and also with the Grand Imam. That is, I mean, the significance is obvious. And I've been a reporter for quite a while, and I tend to take notes about stuff that I think is important and I like. I have got quite a notebook of notes, so I won't tell you them all. But right from the start, the King set the tone. He said, you know, we are a land of ancient civilizations, known for our tolerance, known as the crossroads, known for a place where people meet, as part of his welcome, united by the message of monotheism and the Abrahamic religions. And then he said, all of us bear responsibility for promoting love and tolerance, and peace is our only path. And then he went from the sort of really big thought to the very specific. We've got to end the war in Ukraine. And that was picked up beautifully by the Pope, because it was almost like a mirror image of what he said, because he said we must end the war in Yemen. And the basic sentiments were the same. And then he also ended up with something which I know is very dear to his heart, because he is the son of immigrants from Italy in the 1930s, during the fascist period in Italy. His parents went to Argentina. That's where he was born in 1936. And he has spoken, I think I'm right in saying, almost every conceivable occasion here about migrants and how we must treat migrants better than we do.
Yes.
And I'm interested in your perspective as somebody who lives here. You must actually be rather proud that the Pope has come to a country, quite a small country, but he clearly thinks this is a very important moment in an important country.
Definitely. I mean, being a part of Bahrain, being here, my husband is Bahraini, and seeing the history of the country, learning it for myself. When you're a child and you've lived in this, it's a norm. But when you come in here and you learn the history from the beginning and you learn the culture from the beginning, it really gives a different effect. And in Bahrain, a lot of things are much simpler than they are outside. So we can see some pictures now, Gavin?
Yeah, we can see what it looks like. The motorcade, yes, let's have a look. And presumably,
this is
that's the King's car, yes.
Yes, the King's motorcade.
The King's motorcade going to the airport. So, yes.
So this is His Majesty the King's motorcade arriving now at Sakhir Air Base. It will be followed by His Eminence Dr. Ahmed Al-Tayyib's motorcade, and then His Holiness the Pope.
It's quite remarkable and quite humbling to think that these three leaders are trying to change the world. They're not just trying to change Bahrain or the role of the church, but they are actually trying to change the world. It is quite an ambition, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they have been changing the world, but having it such a public imagery of it right now is what makes all the difference. His Majesty the King arriving.
Well, we're expecting the Pope to arrive in just a few minutes, and yeah,
after His Eminence's motorcade. I mean, okay, now you seeing this and seeing the protocols around this, I mean, you are from a kingdom, you are from the United Kingdom, and you mentioned this, that there are only a few countries in the world that really throw everything out like that to host such a guest.
You can say that again. Is this the?
This
the
is Imam
motorcade?
al-Azhar
The Imam's motorcade coming in. Well, we'll stay with these pictures and talk a little bit about this. Well, there were a lot of things that struck me actually. In military terms, the kind of commands and the way in which things were organized. The Bahrain armed forces reminded me both of the Pakistan armed forces in some ways, and also the British armed forces. The kind of commands, the kind of roles of the sergeant or whoever it was who's barking out the very clipped commands, and the precision with which this happened.
Now we can see His Eminence Dr. Ahmed Al-Tayyib, Imam of Al-Azhar, arriving, and he was heading the Muslim Council of Elders meeting that also took place in the Kingdom of Bahrain in the presence of His Holiness the Pope, which in itself is really a very big message.
It is, and one of the things that we should bear in mind is this kind of thing was not always normal. This, not only the intellectual relationship and not just a business-like relationship, but the fraternal relationship, which we are seeing right on our screens now. And the Pope is included in that. And it's the delight on the faces of the three leaders when they are in each other's company is quite something to behold, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at these pictures and the way they are with each other, that sense of harmony comes to you. I mean, it could be looked at as something that's normal, but when you're in a country like Bahrain, like the Kingdom of Bahrain, you have these huge leaders really getting together and trying to make a difference, and you see the actual materialization of this difference that they're trying to make. These pictures really put me in awe to see this relationship.
Well, presumably the Pope's motorcade will be the third of those to arrive. And there was one
there you go.
Oh, there we go. Right on cue.
Right on cue. That is the motorcade of His Holiness Pope Francis, Pope of the Catholic Church of the Vatican.
And I'm very fond of the Pope mobile, but I'm not sure he's going to be in the little car today. I think he may be in something a bit grander, but he's certainly got a motorcycle escort.
Nope, he's in the little car.
Is he in the?
Right there. That's like a landmark sign, let's say, of his.
It is, but it's a sign, and this is something that many of us, me included, like about the Pope. That he could live in the palace, but he's chosen in the Vatican. But he's chosen not to. He is living in a much smaller quarters. He could be in any car on this planet, frankly, but he is in this one, and he chooses it Fiat, made in Italy, because it suits his personality. He is known as Father Jorge, Father George, which is the very humble name that he took when he was a prelate in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. But he also chose the name Francis because of Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi was known for a couple of things, particularly being very humble, his mission for the poor, and also wishing to have relations with the Arab world, with different cultures. So it is very fitting that he took those names.
Wonderful to know. All right. And that is His Holiness arriving now at Sakhir Air Base. A lot of people are watching this live coverage and sad that he is going, but happy that he came.
One of the many messages that came both from him and the Grand Imam, they said it in different ways, but the Grand Imam said it brilliantly, I thought, when he said, God wants us to be different. That's why he created men and women, people of different races, of different beliefs and so on, because that difference is a strength.
He was quoting specifically from the Quran.
Was he?
Yes.
And that was a very resonant phrase, it seemed to me, or a very resonant argument, because he was saying being different is good, as long as we realize the differences do not make us bitter or argumentative.
Yes. And there we see the three leaders.
Well, we are witnessing a moment of history, aren't we?
Yes, we are. That's the three leaders taking action, like the Pope said.
Yes, that was one of the challenges of the Pope.
Yeah.
He actually challenged us to think, was part of it, but he then challenged us to do.
He's something when we were talking about backstage, you were talking about the history of Pope Francis, even his educational history and his Pope getting to becoming a Pope. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary. He's kind of had two educational histories. One is he's worked at a lot of quite humble jobs. He was a bouncer, you know. He was very sick as a young man. He lost part of his lung. Just think about that. I think he was 21 years of age. And he has always said that he didn't find God. God found him, which is a very profound kind of phrase. And he then, he joined the Jesuits. And the key thing to know about the Jesuits within the Society of Jesus, within the church, is there's never been a pope from that particular branch of the church ever in history. But they are regarded as teachers.
That's what distinguishes them.
That's one of the things that distinguishes them. The other thing which distinguishes them is sometimes joked about, that you don't want to argue with a Jesuit because you'll probably lose. Because they tend to be very intelligent, very well educated, and very good at debating. And very good, as we have seen with this Pope, in finding an image that the tree of life, or which is common to all the Abrahamic religions, and particularly potent here, or the seas of Bahrain, the two seas, and using that image to make an argument. And he was very, very good at that.
Yeah. We can see the three leaders now having their discussions. We can also see the images from Sakhir Air Base, where we can see His Holiness Pope Francis and His Eminence the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmed Al-Tayyib, who are said to be seen off by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa.
And we're looking at it's really quite a remarkable picture. I mean, through the translator there from the Vatican, they are laughing and joking, and because this has been. Look, there's been some very serious discussions, very important arguments. There's also been quite a lot of fun, hasn't there? And when you see the Pope, in particular with children, you can see his face light up. You know, he's quite an elderly man. He has some mobility issues, which we have seen. But as soon as you put a child in his arms, he suddenly becomes, the world's favourite grandfather, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
While Her Majesty the King commended His Holiness the Pope's historic visit and the visit of His Eminence Grand Imam of Al-Azhar to the Kingdom of Bahrain, he noted the humanitarian goals and emphasised the principles of peace and religious freedom between peoples. He also praised the great success of the Mass, which was indeed a great success, held yesterday and attended by tens of thousands of people from Bahrain, across the Arabian Gulf, and we think more than 100 different countries were represented there, which itself is 111 or 110. It's extraordinary, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, you could see the people, a lot of them were last-minute additions, but the space was made and they were accommodated quickly to be part of that Mass. And I think His Holiness the Pope coming and doing this for the community here in the region by itself speaks to his nature as a leader, as a faith leader.
I suppose one of the things is how far this message will carry around the world. I mean, it should do. One wonders just how much the world's media who are here really can reflect all of what's going on, because there's so much bad news, let me put it that way, in the world, and that tends to crowd out good news, and this has been a good news week, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's always time for the bad news eventually, but having this bit of good news and seeing the success of this really historic visit is something that we should dwell on.
The other thing that really strikes me is how many meetings have been going on that we don't see.
Yeah.
I mean, just people talking over coffee or tea or having meals together or just meeting in a corridor. Oh, I don't know you.
The
and
forum
talking.
itself,
The
I mean, the
forum.
meeting that happened during the forum itself, probably the margin meetings.
Yeah, and we've talked to quite a few of those guests who were very, not just very impressive, but were quite elated, weren't they? I mean, we talked to one guest yesterday who went to the Mass, and she said to us, you know, it was so emotional, I could have been anywhere in the world. And then I realized I'm in Bahrain celebrating this with these people. It was for her in particular very emotional, but I suspect in different ways for 30,000 others who attended and the rest of us who just watched it on television.
Definitely, and it could not have been emphasized more than by the speeches of His Majesty the King, His Eminence, Dr. Ahmed Tayyib, and His Holiness the Pope. Education, future generations, and the furthering of the programs and cultures towards coexistence, towards pluralism, towards that openness between religions and cultures as well.
Well, a lot of that goes back to the Bahrain Declaration, doesn't it? I mean, the idea, and I think they've all emphasized it, that ignorance promotes extremism, because extremism is actually quite ignorant. And the more you learn, the more you know, the more likely you are to tolerate each other. And all of them have said that in different ways.
Yeah. Well, just a minute ago, we did see the officials, Bahraini officials, greeting His Eminence and His Holiness the Pope. And now we see all of the leaders going together to bid His Holiness the Pope farewell. His Majesty the King affirmed that common denominators based on the noble humanitarian principles and values have turned relations between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Vatican into a very distinguished model of cooperation to serve humanity by promoting peaceful coexistence between religions and cultures, shunning extremism and fostering dialogue as the only means to achieve people's aspirations for peace, prosperity and sustainable development.
I should say that the King is clearly a great host. I mean, he meets you when you arrive, he takes you to the airport when you leave, and the warmth of this, just looking at these pictures, of course, is that Bishop Hinder? I'm not quite sure from that. But the warmth of the farewells is quite something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just to see that, and also the Grand Imam too, as part of it. I think, well, there's so many takeaways from this, but one is this is not the end.
Yeah.
This is the end of a visit, but it's the beginning of something else.
Yeah.
For each one of them, there have been a lot of challenges, specific challenges on poverty, on migrants, on global climate change, actually, which is, you know, something we all care about, and specific challenges to each individual, because again, in different ways, each one of them has said, you have free will. So what are you going to do with it? What action are you going to take, was the Pope's version. The other version was, are you going to be bitter, or are you going to drink the sweet water that's possible? So in many ways, it's given us all actually quite a lot of thinking to do.
Yeah, it has. I mean, when you listen to the speeches, they're not as much as preaches or anything that are being given, but they're more like face the music, smell the roses, stop, what are you doing? Look at the colors, look at the picture in front of you. How are you going to deal with this? Don't deal with it routinely, don't deal with it like it's just another event or just another thing that's happening. Us facing our problems and finding valid solutions outside of the box at this point, or even realistic solutions that might need a little bit of more effort, should be our choice to make right now, and we should be doing that instead of going back to the old ways of just repeating mistakes or just repeating things that might have solved the problem a little bit but not given a full consensus, having that full consensus between people.
You said something just a few moments ago which made me sit up and think, because I'd said something and you said, well, that's actually from the Quran, which I didn't know. There have been lots of occasions when the Pope has used essentially quotations from the Bible, the very famous one from the New Testament about turn the other cheek, forgive, love thy neighbour as thyself, and so on. And it's interesting how those were, because it was, how can I put this? It wasn't preachy, but it was preaching in a way, because it was using the Bible just as a context to try to change human behaviour in the 21st century, and using the Quran in exactly the same way.
Absolutely.
Almost interchangeably, which is very clever.
Absolutely. This is something that I was trying to talk about yesterday as well. It's the perception of how we read these documents, how we read the Quran, how we read the Bible, how we read the Torah, anything. It's the perception of the person reading it. And if you are a good person at heart, if you want to find a solution, then you will read it in a way, or you will understand it in a way that will solve that problem. And that's really at the end of the line, that's your perception is what matters. And when we look at one of the major problems that have always been there between religions over decades, is that stigma that never goes away. Something happens 3,000 years ago or 100 years ago, and that stigma stays. People have changed, civilizations have evolved, education has evolved, the world has become smaller, and still people from certain religions or certain backgrounds are stigmatized because of a religion that they follow, because of something that happened or might not have happened, or the story was different, or whatever it is. That stigma is still there, and that's what these kind of visits fight.
But also what they're doing is they're talking about we have eternal values, but you can then reevaluate the past and reevaluate what different religions did, sometimes mistakenly perhaps, or different people did mistakenly, and we can think about it so we don't make the same mistakes again. And actually, you know, another thing I should mention, this is just kind of a random thought, we've talked to so many great guests from here, but the young woman who's learning Hebrew really struck me. I did not know that.
Maryam Shah.
Yeah. Wasn't that kind of incredible?
It is incredible, especially that she wanted to do it right after she found an opportunity. Like, this was something that she wanted to do herself after seeing that the relations, how the relations were going after the Abraham Accords, and that was an opportunity. She was like, okay, I want to do that. She wanted to embrace that culture, a culture through language, a culture through religion, and study the language. And I think that is really amazing, because that shows you what the next generation is going to be like.
And our guest from the Shura this morning made that point, because I tried to get him to talk a bit about the law, because one of the things that politicians do is they pass laws to say you mustn't be, you know, do certain things. If you do that, that will be against the law. But he made a much better point, which is it's not about changing the law, it's about changing the culture, which is more difficult, but is more lasting.
Yeah, and being in Bahrain, a country with many cultures and its own culture, it makes it easier to understand other cultures. You, at that point, are not struggling to put yourself in the other person's shoes. No, you actually see what it's like to walk in their shoes and how to be, and you can affect that culture or behavior or whatever it is by sharing the culture together.
Yeah, that's what I thought at the Mass yesterday. I thought, you know, everybody talks about diversity around the world because they know it's a good thing, but we actually see diversity here. Yeah. You feel diversity here. When I have travelled about a limited amount, but when I've travelled about the different people that you see here, some second and third generation migrants and some fairly new migrants, but from all corners of the earth, is quite extraordinary.
It is. I mean, when we look at the migrant issues all around the world, I mean, the cause of them, as His Holiness rightfully said, is war, is conflict. And they have misplaced these people, and these people have been shunned out of their countries and out of their homes and out of their normality in life because of these conflicts that are happening. And going to the basis of why these conflicts are happening is also a way of doing it, but it's going to take a longer time, it's going to take so much effort. Just moving on and just getting through the issues we are with, and so giving that humanitarian support to these migrants is the way to go at this point, because you just want to move on. You don't want to go back into the past.
We've listened to so many speeches. I'm trying to think which leader it was who said this. I think it was the Pope, but who said we're all migrants, because we all came from somewhere different from where we are now. And he certainly did, because he was his family migrated to Argentina. And once you recognize that, then the migrant isn't the other, isn't the scary one that's come to, do something that you don't like because you don't really know about it. The migrant is just like you, somebody looking for a better life for their children. And that was another kind of common thread, because in the end, we all want more or less the same things, don't we? We want safety for our family. We want to be able to work well, eat well, and be happy. Everybody wants that. So the commonality was quite, I suppose, was the strongest theme for the past 4 days.
Even when we listened to His Majesty the King's speech about having these guests here on the ground, it was not a speech of bringing the people together and trying to bring some kind of peace together and everything. No, it was more like, okay, you guys are now guests in my country. How are we going to further this? Let's do this all together. It was like a joint effort instead of him being a mediator between it. No, they were all together in this, and they came here for the same purpose exactly.
Are you surprised at the speed with which this has happened? I think we may...
All right. As we can now see, or as we have seen, His Holiness the Pope is leaving. We can now see the plane at Sakhir Air Base, where we will see His Majesty the King bidding farewell to His Eminence the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar and His Holiness the Pope. His Eminence.
Those pictures are just coming up now, we think.
Yeah. I think now we're going to the Arabic channel to see that that farewell of the plane and His Holiness.
Well, there you can see the plane just waiting, presumably for ground control to give them the clearance for takeoff. The Pope will be flying back to Fiumicino airfield rather, just outside Rome. I think it's about 3.5 hours, one-way trip, and he has been...
I'm very sad that he's leaving, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, I mean, so many people, he brought so much joy to so many people. A lot of people were happy and excited for his visits. I mean, I saw some of the videos that our crew and our reporters got together interviewing the locals and the residents here, and that was so emotional. I mean, a lot of them cried of happiness.
Yes, they did, and we talked to the young mother whose son was blessed by the Pope at the Mass yesterday. She couldn't believe it, could she?
Yeah.
And I think the boy was only 4 years old, so he probably doesn't quite get it yet.
But he has a video.
But he's got a video. And you know what? I've got a feeling that at family gatherings for the next at least 20 years, he'll have to watch that video of himself.
And now we see his plane leaving, as you said. We'll be leaving Sakhir Air Base and going to Rome.
I mean, we were talking about what a remarkable man he is. I mean, I think it's his 86th birthday, just before Christmas. He's had these health issues and mobility issues, but he seems tireless, doesn't he? He seems, and not only that, he seems to be lifted up every time he is with ordinary people.
Yet he asked all people, especially the ordinary ones, to pray for him. And I think that is really important to mention. And all of them did pray for him and for his health and his safety and his strength to carry on his noble faith message.
I was, I know we should talk a little bit about the forum, but I was also very struck by being with Bishop Hinder, who's preparing for the visit. And, you know, here's somebody who's a man of faith, but he's got the leader of his church coming to visit him in what is, you know, it's not a massive cathedral, it's a fairly small church, and he was so proud. And I think he didn't say so, but I know he was a little bit nervous, you could tell.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of expectations, I'm sure, on him and his own expectations for himself. He doesn't want to make this into something that does not elevate that image of the Bahraini church, as well as still have that rituals of the Catholic Church itself, and basically when we look at Father Hinder and the way he approached getting ready and the program that was put in, the agenda that was put into place, you can see a lot of effort went into that.
But I think, you know, at great occasions when you're dealing with humans, things always go wrong, something goes wrong. It looked flawless to me, actually. I mean, people have kept to time, they have made really important statements, people have been happy, people have been, you know, also crowds. One of the funny things about crowds is if you go into a crowd in the London Tube or you go to a football match, they're not always happy crowds. They're urgent, trying to get somewhere. These were happy, patient crowds, as you said, for the Mass itself. People waited hours for that, and it got quite hot during the course of the Mass, even though it was early morning, and yet they were happy. I mean, more than happy, I should say.
Yes, and also when when I was listening yesterday to the students speak, and I don't know if you've noticed that, but His Holiness the Pope in his mass, and when he was talking to them, he likes to give metaphors and stories. So the students themselves giving their stories and just pouring out their hearts to him, really felt like there is that level of comfort, and they've been waiting for this their whole lives, and they have the opportunity, and they just use that.
But I think that's why I think as a journalist, I appreciate so much of this too, because we're in the stories business. But actually, the Quran and the Bible and all holy books are in the stories business too. They tell stories to indicate not just how we should behave, but the choices that face us. And every one of these leaders was very clear. We have a responsibility to do certain things, but we also have a choice. And you can choose, actually, to be not a very nice person or to discriminate against people because you don't like their religion or race, but that is a wrong choice. And the stories that we've heard over the past few days have been an attempt to try to not just counter that, but to show that in Bahrain that is something that you can work away from very, very significantly.
Yes. Also, during the Council of Elders, we also saw His Holiness partake in it and give his speech at that point. And there was nothing in his speech that you could feel would counter any of the, it brought together the beliefs in some kind of way, like having the same rules within the Bible and the Quran, and speaking about the commonalities between both religions when it comes to humanity, when it comes for fighting for good, when it comes from just the points of becoming or being a decent human being, and what needs to be done in order to further that idea, to fight extremism, to fight terrorism through education, through eliminating that kind of ignorance that is there in the world. And I felt that his contribution at that point was very important, even for the Muslim leaders to hear, and vice versa.
Where do you think some of this goes and the forum discussions go from here? Because you've got people all over the world now who'll be paying some attention to this. The Pope has said we need action, not just thinking about it. Where do you think this might go?
Well, the forum discussions and the outcomes were very massive, but the topics that they talked about, when we talk about climate change specifically and food security and this kind of stuff, these are issues that face the whole world. So when you have Muslim leaders and you have Christian leaders and you have Hindu leaders and you have all of these faith leaders coming together to talk about it, a different perspective will be seen. It's not the typical political intellectual one that we are used to seeing and always covering, but as journalists having my open minds to look at the faith leaders' opinions on it, the intellectuals from the faith institutions take a look at it. I'm looking forward to the very different outcomes.
One of the things I mentioned the other day was that when you see leaders behaving, and there we see the plane taking off with His Holiness the Pope, when you see leaders speaking together in friendship, not just negotiations, but friendship, that gives people lower down permission to actually be more thoughtful and try to get along with other people of different backgrounds.
Absolutely. What did you think about the forum? What was your opinion on the forum actually taking place? The concept behind it, the agenda of it.
Well, the agenda, as I understand it, was very much set 5 years ago by that great document produced in Bahrain by His Majesty the King and written by him. And I've read that several times now, and it's actually it's quite remarkable because in some ways it's a very simple document. And I think I said to you before, why didn't we think of it before? Well, maybe we did, but we didn't quite think of it in this way. And so to order some basic principles, which really struck home, you have the right to do certain things. You have the right not to do them, actually. You have the right to worship as you wish, and nobody should bother you. But I, if I choose, have the right to worship in a different way or not to worship at all. So these simple principles, I think, if rather like the Ten Commandments of the Christian Bible and other Quranic hadith and so on, where people are shown a way of acting, these, if everybody were to do this, to do what's in there, it would be a lot better world. We're a long way from that, unfortunately, but we might get there.
Absolutely. And if one thing that you said to me today was they're really challenging us to think, all three leaders. They're just telling us, think about it. So what's your perspective on the outcomes of his visit specifically?
Well, trust me, I think thinking is one of the most difficult things to do, but we have been told it's a good idea, it is a good idea. I think it's opened minds. It certainly opened my mind. I would love to come back and see how things are in a couple of years.
Definitely would love to have you back. This brings us to the end of our special 4-day coverage of His Holiness Pope Francis of the Vatican to the Kingdom of Bahrain at the invitation of His Majesty the King, coinciding with the Bahrain Forum for Dialogue East and West for Human Coexistence.
Well, during the coverage, we brought you all of the public engagements of His Holiness Pope Francis in the Kingdom of Bahrain. I'm Gavin Esther. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
And I'm Sarah Lebrek. Thank you for watching us and goodbye.
Did you know that most people suffering from an episode of back pain do not necessarily have a serious medical problem? And most often, the pain will go away on its own in a few weeks' time. However, there are certain things that you can do at home to speed up your recovery. This includes applying gentle heat packs, using over-the-counter prescription medications after consulting with your doctor, and staying active.
Hello and welcome to this special program marking the historic visit of His Holiness Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church, and His Eminence, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Dr. Ahmed Al-Tayyib, the Chairman of the Muslim Council of Elders, to participate in the Bahrain Forum for Dialogue East and West for Human Coexistence, under the patronage of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. The Bahrain Forum for Dialogue is organized by the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence in cooperation with the Muslim Council of Elders and the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs. More than 200 prominent intellectual figures and religious representatives from different countries of the world are among the participants. The two-day event features a series of poignant discussions that aim to further cement the values of peace and coexistence. More in this report.
The Kingdom of Bahrain is a country that boasts many different communities as part of a whole. Freedom of religious beliefs and the right to express those beliefs are core to the visions of His Majesty Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, whose leadership has culminated into Bahrain's social landscape as one of cohesion and cooperation. One such byproduct of His Majesty's visions is the establishment of the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence. The center facilitates dialogues and policymaking to ascertain the development of religious freedoms, the means of combating ignorance and hatred, and to contribute to the cause on a global scale. The King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence invites specialists in the field from all walks of life to target focal areas, such as education, to actualize the task of ensuring that the right to religious freedom is one enjoyed by not just Bahrainis, but the world. Time and time again, the Kingdom of Bahrain has proven itself a worldly nation. The King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence is one of many examples as to how His Majesty the King and the government of Bahrain are invested in furthering and sharing Bahrain's strong spirit of peace. This has been Khalid Hidris reporting for Bahrain International.
Welcome back. We are pleased to be joined here in the studio by the founder and chairwoman of This is Bahrain and first deputy chair of King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence Board of Trustees, Miss Betsy Matheson, and the deputy chairman of King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence Board of Trustees, Mr. Abdul Wahab Al-Hawaj. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of this event